right. I'm with Eli Lake, everybody. Welcome to Walk-Ins Welcome. Thank you for coming. Eli, how are you doing?
I'm good. I have a 3.5-year-old daughter, and anytime she gets sick, I get a little sick. So that's fighting that. But other than that, can't complain.
Oh, I didn't realize you had a toddler around the same age as my toddler. She is 3.
Oh, great age, right?
It's such a fun age, but you're right. They are just little like host monkeys. I've never been so sick this year. I got every single thing that she dragged through the house.
Is she a chatterbox?
She's very chatty. I mean, she was in my womb, and I probably did 10,000 hours of podcasting while she was in utero. So she came out and just was basically talking immediately.
That's amazing. Yeah, I mean, our little one Nora is talking all the time, and I'm very proud of her. She used perimeter correctly in a sentence on her own, like 3 weeks ago.
Wow.
Incredible.
I asked our kid where last night she was talking about how she was packing for traveling, and I said, "Where do you want to go?" And she said, "California, Rhode Island," which makes sense because we have family there. And then she said, "Japan." I was like, "Japan."
That's great.
Yeah, tell me about your podcast because I love it.
Thank you. It's called Breaking History, and what we try to do is explain how something happened in history that might illuminate and give context to something that's like happening right now.
Mm-hmm.
So, and we do them every other week. They're super well produced. I do a lot of work. We do interviews, but I read a lot of books for them. And I try to kind of give a coherent narrative and bring something. In the recent past, we've done a couple. We did a bunch of them for Honestly feed before. So I did one on to the Roman Republic and kind of tying that to like all the lawsuits against Trump and how like these were like norm violations and like there's like one side violates a norm, the other side violates the norm, and before you know it, you have Julius Caesar and the end of this great republic.
Right.
And like so, sometimes we do like ancient history. The one that is coming out, we're recording on the 27th. The one that comes out on the 28th is about Pakistan's deep state.
Oh.
And so we look at the war we almost had with 2 nuclear powers between India and Pakistan earlier this month. That was thankfully averted. And then I give kind of a thesis about recent Pakistani history going back to 1947 and how, to sum it up, India built a real state and Pakistan built a deep state. And I look at like some of the fun kind of like CIA partnership with the Pakistanis in the 80s and then the war on terror and things like that.
Wow. How do you even find out where to get all the resources for that?
Well, I had been, as a journalist, I've covered national security.
Mm-hmm.
I was at Newsweek. I was at the Daily Beast. I did it for many years for UPI, the Washington Times, the New York Sun. I wrote a lot for the New Republic. So that is something I've had a long career in. So something like Pakistan, which is something I've written about before. I kind of knew some of the players, so I had a relationship. Like one of our big interviews, who was great in this episode, is former Pakistani ambassador to Washington, Hussein Haqqani, who's written a really great history called Magnificent Delusions of like the U.S.-Pakistani relationship. So that's one where like I'm relying on kind of my experience as a reporter focusing on like foreign affairs. And then like the one that I did before, like Lenny Bruce, is I love comedy.
Mm-hmm.
I was obsessed with Lenny Bruce. And I just thought it was an opportunity because we had this vibe shift after the Trump election.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to try to do something that explained kind of why these things happen and get into, I think, difficult concepts. I'm not difficult, but like, when Shane Gillis was fired from SNL right before he was going to start, which I remember that. And I like knew about Shane Gillis because I really like comedy. I thought it was atrocious, but it was interesting because it wasn't like he wasn't arrested for doing his impersonation. By the way, I thought a fairly harmless impersonation. I want to make that very clear, of like a Chinese person. It was just that we were in the middle of a moral panic.
Mhm.
And so so even though he had the talent to get on the cast that year, what was it, 2019, I think,
Mhm.
he was fired, and that like if there hadn't been a new space that was created on YouTube and podcasts, that would have been it for him. I mean, he would have been like, a footnote. We wouldn't know who he is. And now
Maybe.
I just, well,
Maybe.
maybe, but I'm just saying the technology and the changes in these platforms, the fact that we're in this shift, and lots of other things, and the fact that the kind of people didn't follow the elites when it came to these new norms, it meant that like now Shane Gillis is bigger than everybody on that show, and he's
Mhm.
now hosted it twice, and he'll be like an SNL mainstay. So
Mhm.
I mean, it seems like, and that to me just signals that something happened in the culture. And so I compare that to the um efforts of, the New York district attorney and Cardinal Spellman and the goody goodies of the early 60s in New York that were trying to impose their morality on everybody else.
Mhm.
Now,
There Go on.
no, I'm just saying in 1962, they had a whole different set of issues that they were worried about than in, let's say, 2020, the peak of like George Floyd's summer. But it's the same impulse, which is I want to impose these news taboos on everybody else. You're going to follow what I have to say, and you don't really get a say in it. And if you cross the line, there will be severe consequences. In the case of Lenny Bruce, it was his arrest and the legal fees that went along with it as he fought the cases. In the case of like, the casualties, if you will, of the Great Awakening, it was you would never get a Netflix
Right.
contract. You'll never get on HBO. All of the incentives that are built into comedy are closed if you cross the line, unless you're someone like a Dave Chappelle. You're already a legend, and
Mhm.
they can't do anything to you. So I was like, I'm fascinated by that, and how that works, and I just also thought it would be worthwhile to sort of just point out, uh, they tried their best, and now it's like look at the wreckage all around us, and
I
no,
know.
it's over, you know.
This is something I've said many times on other podcasts and other places is when Elon's running around, he's like, make comedy legal again. It's like, Elon, every dude I know is flying in a private jet. Like
Yeah,
they're fine. Don't worry about especially the comedians that were canceled or they came after, they're bigger than ever.
totally. Well, you
And
wrote a great piece in 2019,
yeah,
like way ahead of the curve for the Examiner, and that like you saw it, like you saw it. I mean, I didn't. I wish I'd written that in 2019. Like I kind of feel like all I'm doing is I'm like looking at the arc and I'm noticing that like it's over now. But like you were, I think there were real consequences back then.
yeah, I think I came about in it and a lot of things. We were just covering a lot of this, that New York Times piece that everybody was quote tweeting about the focus groups are doing and how they're putting 20 million into this code named
Oh,
Sam
unbelievable.
thing that's like,
I know.
going. And I was saying, we found this piece that I wrote for Playboy because that's where I started in 2016. And I said, it was more about relationships, but it's like she dates assholes because you're a pussy. And I was saying, this is exactly where America is at with Republicans and Democrats. Like, we're
Totally.
dating an asshole because the Democrats are coming across as weak
Right.
and kind of pussies. And they're very, I think about the Kamala campaign, and it felt like you had the uncanny valley feeling about the whole campaign. You'd see those rallies, and I'm like, why is this triggering like uncanny valley? It feels like
Yeah.
it's not real. People are sensitive to that stuff, I think. So I think,
Everything about her came off as fake.
yeah,
And I'm sure there's a real person in there. I'm not assuming. I'm sure there is a real person in there. And that
maybe.
real person might even be interesting. But for whatever reason, the messaging machine of the Democratic Party forgot how to present a genuine candidate and forgot the idea. And like, it's like, I don't think they even realized how much they were alienating just normal people who would be with them for like a lot of it. Like, I mean, I'll just take the
Right.
trans issue. I'm at the point where on trans, if you're an adult and
Mhm.
you decide to transition, I believe that you should be treated with respect like anybody else. You've made that decision as an individual. You're an adult and you should do it. It's when not only were we told that you are going to save the life of somebody who's 11 doing this or 13 in the middle of puberty, where I'm like, I'm not so sure that a 13-year-old can make that decision on their own.
Of course.
But that if you were doing journalism like Abigail Schreier,
Mhm.
that were looking at the clusters of this and saying, wait, something is way off when you have all of these people in this age group and they all are women, they're trying to transition. Like, what's going on here? And that the guy who was like one of the lead lawyers of the ACLU, this guy Chase Strangio, said, I'm going to make it my mission, even though you are affiliated with an organization called the ACLU, which is supposed to defend individual liberty, to make sure that you are not allowed to sell your book on any of the major platforms and try to basically like destroy your life economically.
Mhm.
I'm like, that's the moment where I said, this is like crazy, because you
Yep.
had me for not 85% of the agenda.
Yep.
And believe me, 20 years ago, I was not comfortable with trans stuff, but culturally, you know what I'm saying? I evolved, you
Right.
know what I'm saying? So I was going to be one of your people. Like, you know what I mean?
Right.
I was in the
Right.
group. And it's a similar thing. Like after George Floyd, I remember Rush Limbaugh and even Donald Trump, everybody looked at that video and said, this is completely and totally unacceptable. This is horrible. You had a moment of crazy unity where
Yep.
like there was an act of police violence was caught on tape and everybody thought it was terrible. And then within like a few days, it became like, unless you think we should get rid of the institution of the police, you're a racist. I was like, wait a second. I didn't sign up for all of that. So it's like,
Yep.
it's that kind of thing. That's a moral panic at
Yeah.
that point.
I do think culturally, and this is the stuff that, I was saying this about the men problem in this article, which I hadn't revisited until we did this dumpster fire talking about this New York Times article. And in it, I say, look, I know that you're not allowed to anger the feminists, and God forbid you say anything about like a man being able to do man stuff, but I don't care. And that was in 2016. And now we're here almost 10 years later, and you're wondering why you lost men. These trends have been people. What's frustrating from my perspective is they'll put out these articles and they'll say, "Hey, who do we talk to?" It's like talk to the Democrats that you lost. There's many of us who have been quite open about it and have.
Yeah.
Like people have literally written books about how the left lost them. I've read
Or like my
10
favorite
versions of that book in
right.
the
We need a
past
Democrat.
decade.
We need a Democrat, Joe Rogan. I'm like, hey guys, Joe Rogan's a Democrat. He
Yeah.
voted for Bernie. He wants socialized medicine. He's not he's not a real conservative guy. What are you talking about?
I mean, how many articles about how the working out is right wing or Nazi? They did
I
so
know.
many of these stupid articles that made things that were pretty normal, the American flag, working out, suddenly right coded. And you guys, what are men supposed to do in this instance if you have? And this is what we were talking about this morning, actually, on Mark Halperin's show, and I was with Batya, and it's like, you've been telling all men that they're rapists for a decade, and then you're like, why don't men like us anymore? And this is what I liked about the podcast you did about comedy, because weirdly, I was kind of standing in the Venn diagram of where all of this stuff was intersecting in 2015 as I merged into the culture wars, knowing nothing about the culture wars. I was a born and raised liberal Democrat, and then I didn't really question anything. I was drinking a lot. I got sober in 2013. And I started, my editors used to be like, you sound like a bro from the 90s. And I'm like, well, I pretty much am. I didn't go to college. I didn't get indoctrinated with all this stuff. It was a steep learning curve when I kind of merged online into this. And so I don't think I had any idea which direction things were shifting in, but I happened to be writing at Playboy and doing comedy right and in 2015, and everything got real weird.
You're right. 2015 is the year. 2014, 2015 is like when it all tipped over, it seemed.
Yeah, it was a decade ago. Are you dealing with an HMO like I am? It is such a pain in the bum. If I want to get any sort of testing done to ensure I'm making my health a priority, I have to wait weeks for an appointment to see my doctor. Then I have to get a referral from her and wait weeks more for an appointment with the specialist I needed to see. Quest simplifies this process. I can purchase my own lab tests online and test for a multitude of health issues I might be concerned about. Then take those test results to my doctor, better armed with the information I need. At questhealth.com, you can get hundreds of tests across several different categories, from allergies to heart health, hormones, sexual health, women's health tests for egg quantity, perimenopause, menopause, men's health tests for testosterone, prostate, and so much more. These are lab quality tests, the same ones you'd be given at your doctor's office. So prioritize your health and visit questhealth.com today. Use the code Phetasy to get 25% off and find answers to the multitude of health questions you may have. That's questhealth.com and use code Phetasy for 25% off.
I think it was like a combination of the power of online outrage mobs, which started off, like, I think the left figured that out before the right did, but the right, of course, learned from the left. That always happens. I think it was like slowly but surely, if you go back to Twitter in like 2011, they're like, we're the free speech wing of the free speech movement. Like, they were like, anything goes. And then slowly but surely, there were a couple categories, which at the time, everybody kind of agreed, yeah, that's not great. Like Al-Qaeda snuff videos. Yeah, maybe don't share that on your platform. Right. And then it was like bullying. And there was some horrific examples. I'm going to, by the way, try to steel man this stuff, right? There was horrific examples of people who would be bullied, and probably it was just like the penalty was so over the top for whatever offense it was. And that can have a horrible psychological. But so there was an effort to try to deal with that. Then 2016 comes along, and the Democrats say it was all Russian disinformation. So, all right, we're going to deal with Russian disinformation. And at first, by the way, that's not such a bad thing. It's true. Foreign governments absolutely play propaganda, black propaganda games all the time. If you identify accounts because of your, you have the ability to look at the back end of your software and you can tell that these are not authentic, great, identify them as such. But then it became like, oh, voting disinformation. Right. So then it became medical disinformation. And then medical disinformation was like, okay, yeah, we're in the middle of a pandemic. But then like doctors, like medical school professors who were like, I don't think this is, we need to separate this much. I don't think I'm questioning the vaccine for these healthy people. What are we doing here? And blah, 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 blah. And then they got like swept up in it. And then we saw, and this was one of the most egregious, there was a legitimate story the New York Post had that uncovered like venal corruption by Hunter Biden and the Biden family. Totally legitimate news story. And then that was Russian disinformation. Yeah. And the New York Post editorial account was suspended unless they apologized, and they didn't. So then you had this sort of effort of the content moderators getting more and more powerful because they were given more and more categories of things, plus definitions of hate speech. And then the Babylon Bee gets suspended because they did a funny joke about the trans assistant secretary of Health and Human Services. All of that is just piling up, and everybody knows it. And then we're seeing in like kind of what's left of what I call like mainstream, big mass-produced culture and media. I'm talking about like Netflix shows and network television. All of a sudden, like, there are trans characters, and every single show looks like a Benetton ad from the 80s. And like, it all looks this kind of cookie cutter thing. It's like people are you trying to program me? And by the way, it's, again, I'm coming at it similarly. Like, I don't object to sure, great. Like, I have a gay friend. I don't care, but like it seemed really, really deliberate. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
there was an effort to do it, and then the way in which like legit people in Me Too, right, were canceled. Like there were some people who I'm like, I don't cry for Harvey Weinstein. I'm not
Right.
Candace Owens. I don't cry for, you know what I mean? Like, sure, he was a dirtbag and it caught up to him, and that's life in the big city. But there were lots of other people where it was like, really, you're going to ruin this guy's life? And then it was also like another question that never occurred to anybody during the Me Too stuff was, okay, whatever you think of what Louis C.K. did in 2013 or whenever it was, what about all the millions of people who consider Louis C.K. one of the greatest comics we've ever had?
Mm-hmm.
Is your intention to deprive that audience? Like, have you thought about that? Like, if there is an audience for these people. So all of this is happening, Bridget, at a moment when like the barriers to entry, if you are a content creator, are just have evaporated.
Right.
Like, you know what I'm saying? You can build an audience on YouTube. You can build an audience on a podcast. You don't need to go to one of these networks. You don't need to like back in the day, this is before both of our times, like you had to like, you would do your act at the Comedy Cellar or the Laugh Factory or something like that. And if you were lucky, one of the producers for Johnny Carson or Jay Leno would be there, and then maybe you would get the call, and then they would put you on, and that would launch your career. Those days are over.
Yeah.
If you're funny, you know what I'm saying? Like, you can build an audience, and you don't need that producer guy to come down and watch your act at the Laugh Factory or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So I just think all those things kind of happened, and it was only a matter of time before everybody was just like, "Wait a second, the emperor has no clothes. This is a sham." And then Trump was elected.
And it does remind me a lot about the censorship stuff you were talking about too. That weird paradox where the people who were pushing back against this stuff learned pretty quickly that if you got canceled or something like that, you could kind of kick that victim can and pass it around, and suddenly it would make you even bigger. In some ways, it was like the parental advisory lyrics, as you mentioned in your podcast. Yeah. Like being canceled is that new. It's not censorship, but it had that almost same effect. The Streisand effect of now everybody's talking about you. You're something that's been banned. You're considered dangerous. I'm curious to know where things go now that that's the mainstream.
Well, it's good and bad, right?
Yeah.
I'm a big free speech absolutist, so I don't think we should censor Kanye's latest single, Heil Hitler. But is that good? Is that good for the culture? Like, is that good? Like, you know what I mean? Like, I don't know. We had a pretty good consensus going for like a long time that like the worst thing in the world was being a Nazi. And now you have one of the most talented musicians of our era in Kanye West. Like, I hate to say this, it's a freaking bop. It's an earworm.
It's an earworm.
I can't deny that it's an earworm. I'm Jewish. I can't deny that this is like, oh man, like if you're gonna make the Heil Hitler song, at least could it suck? I mean, it doesn't suck. You know what I mean? It happens to be really catchy.
Yeah.
So like, I don't know. That's not great. I don't think it's great. I mean, I'm not going to denounce Joe Rogan because he has on all kinds of people. And I understand the nature of his show is that he explores all kinds of interesting stuff, what he finds interesting. But, I mean, like, I don't know. Is there a new kind of momentum to question whether Churchill was the real villain in World War II? That's an obvious one that we at the Free Press are concerned about. And I do think that there's a difference between, I want to make this super clear. I am not saying that, we should go back to content moderation. Absolutely not. No, we shouldn't. That's a bad idea. But there is an understanding, I think it should be like, okay, well, you've got your free speech. I've got my free speech. And let's you're not immune from criticism if you're going to go out there and say things that I think are like, not verboten, but that are way out there. And, it's like, and so we're in flux right now, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I think a lot of the pushback too is like this was already resolved, and it's like, all right, well, I guess we might have to resolve it again. We're
Well,
not
that
gonna.
happens. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. I guess we're gonna have to go through the history books, and I guess we're gonna have to have some of these debates again, and it hopefully it's like such a weird. I said this after the Trump won this time. He had the popular vote, whatnot. Like the dog caught the car a little bit,
Oh
and
yeah.
you're. I'm like, okay, now what? You're not the underdog. This comedy isn't underground or counterculture. It is the dominant culture. My Instagram feed has drastically changed the tone of the reels and whatnot that are suddenly allowed to come through. And there was kind of 10 years of intense censorship from algorithms, really. And like you said,
Yes.
people, Megan Murphy, my friend, was banned for misgendering off of Twitter, that the person up in Canada, the one who wanted her balls waxed.
Oh.
This was like a famous story. I can't even remember his name, but she was banned from Twitter for years and people will be like, "Oh, no one was actually silenced." It's like there were many people who got deplatformed, demonetized, silenced,
Yeah,
kicked
their like
off.
reach was throttled. Right.
Right. And I think that still exists to a certain extent. And there's I don't know. It's a very weird time because I think, like you were saying in your podcast, that moment when Tony Hinchcliffe was at the rally and then he made his joke, which, by the way, I've heard him make that joke in clubs a million times before. And this was a kind of an abbreviated version of it. And it's in a comedy club, you're like, yeah, whatever. and
Yeah,
his
no, it's
whole
the context, right, and it's
but
also because you and
he
I watch Kill Tony. We
right.
love Kill Tony. But, like, if you don't know about Kill Tony and you're just like, "Oh, here's another speaker at the Republican presidential rally." What? You're not a Puerto Rican, you can't say that, like
Yeah. It was funny. I was flying back from doing Hereticon. I was doing some like emceeing down in Miami, this event down that Peter Thiel and they all kind of put it on, and it's a lot of speakers. And I was just emceeing for the speakers. And I was going through security, and there was weirdly no one in line with me. And everybody was debating this moment. They were all talking about they were like, this woman was saying, I don't care what he said, I'm still voting for Trump. And this other guy said, yeah, but he was talking down there, and they're all Latino, basically talking about having this debate. And as I'm going through TSA, and this guy comes up to me, he's like, what do you think? I was like, why are we talking about this right now, sir? I'm like, I'm too close to the situation to have a comment on it. But it was interesting that even, that was when I realized, hearing a lot of their opinions just going through TSA, I'm like, it's not going to matter. And I asked this guy, so I asked the TSA agent, I said, well, what do you think? Do you think that it's going to affect the way people vote? If you're Puerto Rican and you were going to vote for Trump, do you think that they will not vote for Trump because of what Tony said? And he said, this was his exact quote, well, the gay stuff has gone too far. I was like, what are you talking? That was his response. I was like, yeah, exactly. Like, people
I mean,
aren't.
one of the great okay, so it used to be Don Rickles, legend, right?
Yeah.
So what Don Rickles, his whole thing, he would make fun of every group.
Mm-hmm.
That was his deal. And then when you would say, "Hey, wait a second, that joke was over the line," he'd say, "Well, I offend everybody," and that was like the norm. Like I mean, we're both Gen X, right?
Yeah.
I think that was the norm until like the very early 2000s, and then
Yeah.
it changed. But like, I'm sorry, Rickles is hilarious.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is that if you go back and if you watch like the Dean Martin roasts from like the late 60s, early 70s, it's amazing you say to yourself that this was on network television, but it doesn't mean that network television was more permissive because there were all kinds of other things that you could never even touch on network television.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? So it was an interesting thing. It's like so it's not that the taboos, they're fewer or they're more. It's that they shift over time. Like you could, I mean, I get into it in the podcast, but you could say the N word, like not as an epithet if you were a white person, but you could say the N word, like to introduce that song by like, Yoko Ono and John Lennon. And, people live with it. It was uncomfortable. At a certain point, you couldn't even utter it.
Right.
And so the things change. And so, I mean, the question I sort of posed is like, okay, we're now in like a kind of like open the floodgates moment.
Mm-hmm.
Does that mean that there's going to be a white comic that's going to break out the N-word in a bit? And I asked Noam Dorman, the owner of the Comedy Store, it's just like, well, if he does, you got to be really, really funny. You know what I mean? Like you got to really knock it out of the park if you do it. I thought that was a great answer because it's like, I kind of feel like if you can make it funny, then, it'll work because I think that's fundamentally like what we want. And also in America, the comic is not just an entertainer. In America, I think the comic is also like, as I say, it's the place, it's the one man or one person courtroom on that stage where you interrogate like why do we have a taboo about this, and we kind of need it. It's like that's our cultural release valve. So it's more than just like I go to a club, make me laugh like you're a jester in a feudal court. That's why I feel that not every comic, I mean I wouldn't include this but not every comic, but I think in the tradition of Lenny Bruce, Richard Pryor, George Carlin, that the comic is also kind of a dissident. And I think that in this era, by the way, that we're coming out of, people like you and Tim Dillon and others played that role, that there were these podcasts, or Andrew Schultz or others, where you would listen and you would hear things that you knew, like, oh, you can't say that, but you kind of want to hear it because it's like, hey, why is it that we can't say it?
Yeah.
So in some ways, and that's what a dissident was in a different context, I'm not comparing America to the Soviet Union, but that would be like, the equivalent of like Václav Havel, wrote essays and plays that were banned by the state, but like that people had to see them and read them. And it was very important because that was that release. And comedy kind of plays that role in our society.
Yeah, it's interesting because there's so many different kinds too. What was really fascinating listening to your podcast about the comedy and Lenny Bruce in particular, so many things I didn't know about Lenny Bruce. For one, I had no idea. There was just a lot I didn't know about his history that I thought I knew. And
Can I ask you a question? Do you think it's still funny?
Lenny? Or
yeah.
I didn't know that he was like, I didn't know he was persecuted or prosecuted, or I'm not sure. Was he actually? I can't remember now. But his jokes about Jackie Kennedy, I didn't know that was some verboten thing that you couldn't say. It was like, how dare you desecrate the sanctity of this like moment with Jackie Kennedy and her husband being shot. And what was also interesting listening to your podcast, I don't know, my brain I've been trying to think about so many things because it really made me think about all these things at once. So there's that where I'm like, we don't have a dominant culture. This is something Colin and I were just talking about over the weekend. There is not like mainstream America. We don't have a couple of channels that we all gather around. Everything is fractured now. Yeah. We have all these tiny niche audiences. Yes, Joe's podcast is huge. Kill Tony is huge. But that's still not the dominant culture. I still don't know that everybody knows what Kill Tony is. I don't think my dad knows who has ever heard of that podcast. Even the first time I went on Joe's podcast in 2019, it was the biggest podcast in the world, and my dad had never heard of him. My dad had never heard of him until CNN went after him during COVID. And that's when he was like, "Hey, is Joe Rogan that guy whose podcast you went on?" But this is how I kind of.
By the way, to the shame of SNL for also going after him.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But they only make him more. They only make him more famous. You know, he was not. I would consider a household name.
Well, this is my thing. I disagree with CNN, and I don't know. I think you and I both had our red pill paths. You know, like I had my red pill path for something called Russiagate in the first term, and I wrote a bunch of pieces saying, "Hey, I think this Russiagate stuff is bullshit."
I remember.
And let's just say I got a lot of shit from other mainstream journalists, and I didn't get invited to cocktail parties I used to get invited to, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Okay. So but like for me, it's like, okay, CNN wants to do this ridiculous thing, kind of understand it. But if you're a comic and you're gonna go after other comics and you can't understand that you're fashioning a rod for your own back,
right?
Shame on you.
Yeah.
Like, so when SNL did the bit where they had like Joe Rogan and I forget what the drug that he thought was good, which turned out to be pretty good anyway. Ivermectin, right?
Yeah.
Which turns out, by the way, ivermectin is great. Like, it cures a bunch of things. But anyway, leaving all that aside, like SNL like goes after him. I was like, there's something like deeply wrong and rotten with the culture and this institution. And I saw there were others like I don't know. I'll name some names, like Andy Richter went after people like who, you know what I mean, who crossed whatever, kind of woke red lines at the time. And to me, and like the worst was Stephen Colbert. Like Stephen Colbert, I don't know, in 2013 was hilarious. Like when he did the Colbert Report on Comedy Central, I thought it was one of the funniest things. And now he's just become an unfunny jester for the 1%. And, I just feel like he's just doing like, it's not funny anymore. It's like stand-up polemicist.
Yeah.
Stand-up polemicist. But also it's like, he's like, there was like a fifth column, everybody in comedy should be like, everybody in comedy should argue about everything.
Yeah.
But they should be in agreement on one thing, which is that don't go after our platform, because this is the one place in the culture where there cannot be any limits on what we say, because that's what we do.
Right.
And so when you started seeing comedians turning on other comedians like that, to me, I was just like, okay, well.
That was it for me, for a lot of people. I mean, that was what was happening in 2015, 2016. And it was very frustrating seeing from people who I idolized, like Sarah Silverman is one. And I was like, you made your name being subversive, pushing the edges, saying the uncomfortable thing. And now it feels a little bit like you're pulling the ladder up behind you. She was like, I don't understand why you hate me. I'm like, I don't 100%. Hate you. I just don't think it's fair. I don't think it's fair that now, in order to kind of protect yourself, because you did things that you're being criticized by this new mob that's running out of people to cancel. So they're looking for people who made jokes that they maybe wouldn't make today 10 years ago, that you're now throwing new comedians under the bus, because what chance do they have? You can't find... I mean, you have to be able to go over the line to kind of find where it is. Because generally, if you go over the line, you're gonna get a groan. You're not gonna get a laugh.
That's why those first Chappelle specials were such an event.
Mm-hmm.
He was willing to go on his special and say, you know what, Louis C.K. is my friend, and these women who say that they ruined their careers in comedy have a brittle spirit. That was his joke.
Yeah.
That was a joke, and it was funny. This is the thing, by the way. Colin Quinn, when I was going through this and like interviewing him, he said, okay, yeah, but like it has to be funny.
Right.
Like if it's not funny, it's not comedy. And I appreciate his point. Or like the alphabet people thing, which I played in the podcast. Those were jokes, but they were also like really important kind of cultural moments, because that was the guy, and he did have that platform. I mean, Chappelle is somebody who reached, tens of millions of people. And that made it so that we, people can say, wait a second, why am I, going along with some of these taboos? is it the end of the world? Is our words violence? That kind of thing. And we were getting a lot of it. So, that's why I think Chappelle, is the god right now. And some of these other people who were as big as Chappelle 10 years ago are kind of culturally relevant at this point.
Yeah. And I do agree with Colin in that, you hear a lot about like, oh, it's subversive. And then what happens at moments like this in comedy is everybody thinks, oh, now if I'm saying something that's getting groans, or if I'm saying something that isn't getting a laugh, it's because it's too much for the culture, or I'm saying, making a bad joke about Hitler, or making a joke about whatever. It's because it's too much, and it's not just inherently because it's not funny. So what happens when this kind of pendulum swings is now you've got really a lot of this stuff is very kind of lowest common denominator. And it's like, just because you're saying something racist doesn't mean it's funny. It might be racist.
Right.
And so this is where I think Colin is a genius, is that his loyalty is to just what's funny. It doesn't matter if it's subversive, or it doesn't matter if it's not. It just matters, is it funny or is it not? And now, even on my Instagram reels, I'm seeing this kind of it's the overcorrection, where you're like, ugh.
Yeah, we kind of are in an overcorrection now,
that's aren't we? Pretty racist. Yeah, that's
I see some stuff and I'm just like, all right, like, if you want to make jokes about men and women or something like that, fine. But like, you don't have to be this caricature. Like, I don't think the dude bros that the Democrats lost are all a bunch of like Neanderthals who just like, hey, you need to like get me a sandwich and give me a BJ or something like that. That is like, I don't think that's a dominant like view in the culture.
No.
I do think, and so like assuming that all of those guys, that's what they want to hear is wrong. You know what I'm saying? You have to sort of find it and make it fresh. Can I ask you a question, Bridget? Because I'm fascinated by comedy. It's like, you can probably tell, but anyway, I love it, but I never did it. But like, here's my question for you.
Yeah.
It's your job. How do you turn something that you like have to be funny to pay the bills? But humor sometimes it comes out of like kismet or serendipity. It's like, you know what I mean? Something kind of is funny unexpectedly.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you find the nerve? How do you find the joke, knowing that your paycheck depends on it? You know what I'm saying? Those things that would always struck me as like a hard tension, because it's like, you got to come up with a new routine. You got to keep coming up with, you got to make it fresh. But at the same time, like to find the humor, you almost have to sort of convince yourself. It's like golf, like relax, but also pay attention to every little thing in your swing. So it's a paradox, right?
Yeah. Well, one thing happened to me when things got weird in comedy in 2016, 2017, 2018, and I started having my red pill moment, or whatever you want to call it. I lost friends in comedy, and they were real life friends in Los Angeles, and I got insecure. I wasn't really secure enough in myself or my comedy even to continue to push through that, and I wasn't big enough like a lot of these guys who were able to push through. And so I think I lost my nerve a little bit, but I was building an online audience. In 2019, I decided to really focus on that. Thank God. And then I started Dumpster Fire, and I started this podcast in Dumpster Fire, and my paycheck was no longer dependent. And I wasn't making my living just doing comedy. I was still waiting tables. So I was lucky in that now I have
waiting tables, writing for Playboy, and
doing comedy. Yeah.
Wow.
And right now I'm doing 3 podcasts, and I still have a day job. It's just, and I get paid to do comedy, but it's not like my living. I think what happens now has more to do. There's a couple things. One thing that struck me when I was listening to your podcast was a very simple line about how Lenny Bruce became bitter. He became obsessed with his persecution, is the way you said it. And I see that a lot in comedy. People becoming obsessed with being canceled, or the woke mob is coming after me, and they become obsessed with that, or it's very hard not to become bitter in entertainment in general. I think in the arts, I think in life. I don't care if you're a plumber or whatever. There is a lot of wisdom in keep your eyes on your own paper. Comparison is the thief of joy. He was actually being persecuted, but like you say, I'm in recovery, so I know resentment will kill me eventually. I will start stewing. I will become bitter. I would start becoming racked with envy and disappointment in myself, and then your comedy is no longer funny, and now it's bitter. And I think then it becomes this kind of downward spiral, and it sounds like that's what happened with Lenny Bruce. And so there is an interesting interaction in that aspect of the business. Some people are very lucky. They get successful. And one thing that I really respected about Shane when he got canceled, he did not do that, kicking the victim can at all. He was like, okay, and kept going. He wasn't out there whining about it. He wasn't on Hannity. He could have easily leaned into that at that moment, especially when people were blowing up doing that, and he didn't. He just kept going. And I think that's part of the reason that he's huge, is because fundamentally I think he's just a good guy who wants to make fun of everything and doesn't need to lean into kind of ideology in one way or another. And I feel that's a little bit of our job. And then I think another thing happens, and audience capture is a real thing. So more to your point, I think people who get huge, if you've built your comedy around being a certain way, if you're liberal, or if people have these expectations of you, if you are more right wing and you start swinging in one way or saying something, you risk alienating your audience, and that has a real effect on your paycheck. And I can see how you would just keep going in one direction, and whether you realize you're being led in that direction or not. And
that's, by the way, can I say something? Even though I disagree with Bill Burr's latest takes on Gaza, I respect the hell out of him for not staying in the anti-woke lane. What I mean is I feel like Burr is kind of deliberately saying, all right, you know what? There's an element of my audience that may not like this, but I'm going to do that,
But I feel like everyone's even anti-woke seems, I would say the subversive thing would be to be pro-Israel if we're talking about.
Well, sure. I agree with that. My point is that you would maybe expect Burr to do a kind of joke because of his persona. That would be I don't know. I'm not a comedian, but it'd be hey, it sucks, so don't start the war or something like that. Right. But I just am saying whatever, he's going where he's going, and he's he's avoiding that capture, and I appreciate him, even though I have friends who are like, oh, what happened to Bill Burr? And I'm like, well, he's that's the thing. It's sort of like Bob Dylan. Bob Dylan at various points in his career gets really huge, and then just tells that fan base, all the folkies love him, and he goes electric. And then all these people who love his rock music love that, and then he's like, hey, I'm going to do Nashville Skyline, and it's a total country album. And then a few years later, he's like, I found Jesus, and I'm going to do a whole record about how great Jesus is and how I'm a fundamentalist Christian now.
Right.
And I dig that. That's the way, and what I'm saying, that's how you stay true to your art. You follow where you're going, and and you're right, you don't let the audience capture you, and it becomes stale. And that's why I think it's kind of hard for Chappelle, because he had such a great run, but he can't go back and just give us more alphabet people jokes. He's got to find a new thing, so I do think, and I hope he does.
Well, and I do think too that it's tough. Some of it is a little bit of class. I think once you get super rich, you just there's something whether you realize it or not, you're not as relatable to the common person. You can kind of try and pretend, but your day-to-day life is so different than the average American's day-to-day life that there is, like, you saw it with Ellen, you see it with, like, I don't know. I think if this is one reason I think Rogan manages to stay in touch is he's always hanging out with up and coming comedians who are developing and are struggling. So he's still very much in contact with people who have the struggle, even though he's incredibly successful. I don't know.
Also, he's a rich guy now who doesn't spend his money on stuff that most rich guys spend their money on.
Right. Right.
Like,
he's like
he
building.
spends his money on like crossbows so he can go boar hunting.
Yeah.
Which is not like, that's not like what Bill Gates would spend his gazillions on. You know,
and he's building actual community. He's trying to build a community of comedy in Austin. I think he's trying to build something tangible and in real life. And I think it's easy to lose a little bit of touch, and then you have to try and I don't know, like there's something to be said for that struggle. And art. This is why I'm not entirely worried about AI taking over everything until AI can get addicted to heroin or whatever. Like,
hey, can I ask you? What do you think of Tim Dillon?
I love Tim. I mean, Tim and I.
Me too.
I've known him. I call him the collective nervous breakdown that America is having. It's like he is so we just recently saw his stand up, and I thought his interview, what I could watch of it, that CNN journalist who interviewed him recently sounded like she was on like a ton of Xanax, and I couldn't take the like ASMR voice. I have like a sound sensitivity. I was like, I can't take it. But he did great. He's hilarious. I truly think he is like this. We watched the stand up. I'm like, this is it's like the collective psyche of America right now is so all encapsulated in whatever is coming out of his mouth at that moment, just kind of all over the place.
So
and
there was a moment with him, and I forget what I was listening to. It might have been 2019, 2020 or something. It was before he really blew up.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm listening to him, and at first you're listening to him, I'm like, this guy just sounds like the dirtbag comics of the early 20 teens. Like, you know what I mean? I'm like, okay, he's kind of shocking. And then there's a moment where he's just like, I am gay. I suck cock. And I'm like, whoa, I've never heard a gay comedian. And it blew my mind. I'm like, wow, this is unbelievable. And like, I just never heard anything like that before. And then I just thought, from there on, there was something so subversive about him in the pandemic summer.
Yeah.
And like, we were all isolating and sheltering in place. And I just like remember, like, it was when that podcast came out, I was like, okay, my sanity break. You know what I mean?
I think thinking about your podcast about vulgarity and whatnot, one of the things I've been considering as we talk about this pendulum swinging and how post Lenny Bruce, we had George Carlin and all of these people, and it didn't matter anymore, and the censors are frowned upon. And I've been thinking about this in the context of comedy and also just AI and many things. Can you put this stuff back in the bottle? Can you ever really put the genie back in the bottle? What are the third rails now that there are really no third rails? We literally have Kanye doing a Heil Hitler song. So I don't, this is kind of this question, the bigger question of, does progress kind of lead to just cultural disintegration?
Well, some of it's technological, right? So the one thing I didn't get into, and I think it'll be another podcast, is just like, you have to go back to 1997, and there's the legislation that kind of creates the internet as we know it.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a huge debate over well, wait a second, can you put pornography on the internet?
Mm-hmm.
And instead, what was determined was that there was going to be a compromise, which is that we're going to encourage the original online service providers to have these rules that they would enforce as private companies. And they would be encouraged basically to say, no, 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 you can't spread like that kind of thing. And what ended up happening basically was like there are limits. There's certain things you can't put on the internet, like child pornography, or you can't snuff films, things like that.
Right, because
But
they're crimes.
right, obviously.
Yeah.
However, everything else kind of like goes. And so once pornography becomes like a click away because of technology, then that's like 50 years of legal fights over community standards and whether you can open
Yeah.
a porno shop or a porno theater in this neighborhood. And it's just
Yeah.
like a huge thing that like in the 70s and 80s, like that was a major political debate.
Oh
Out
yeah.
the window, who cares? You know
Yeah.
what I mean?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
you can get it if you want. And, you know, so it's like the barrier to entry. So that part of it is that. But I think the other part of it is that we just kind of like, as a culture, we sort of said, no, the heroes were people like Lenny Bruce or like there was, I mean, you remember the movie, The People versus Larry Flint?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Now it's interesting because imagine like you would not have made that move. I mean, like, at the time, Larry Flint was considered to be like kind of this horrible person
Mm-hmm.
in like 1975 for most of America. But by 1995, Milos Forman makes like, a pretty great film kind of saying, you know what, if you don't like it. And then Howard Stern is another example.
Yeah.
And so you had all these sort of milestones and we're left with a very vulgar culture. Um, I don't necessarily have a problem with it. I do think that it's like, that's the price we pay for freedom. And I think if I think you will not have a happy life if you only wallow in vulgarity. Like
Mm-hmm.
you have, you know what I mean? However, it's kind of where we are. And, I mean, I think it's fair I think we're both new parents, so, do I want my, is it okay for an 11-year-old to see that as an okay,
Right.
it's different. Like I think a 20-year-old, sure, but 14, I don't know.
Yeah, it's a little weird too. I think a lot of, like you said, all those arguments we had, like could you show Playboy on the new magazine rack? All these free speech and
Yeah.
around porn now seem just like moot point. I feel very similarly to the phones in schools debate. I'm like,
Yeah.
guys, like these kids are using AI. What are you talking about? It feels like the wrong question. I'm like, that horse is like, that's out of the gates. You're 10 years behind this debate. You should have had this debate 10 years ago because.
Okay. So speaking of AI, and this is going to be a total egotistical question for me. What did you think of the Sheryl Crow-esque song that I had in the middle of that podcast about Lenny Bruce? That was an AI song.
I loved
wrote
it.
that.
I
I write the lyrics and I do the prompts.
Okay.
So there is like human work.
Yeah.
But like the Ghost in the Machine do it,
Well, because it
and then I
didn't
get
get
versions
credited,
and I kind of tweak it. What?
Because it didn't get credited, I figured it was your creation because I know you do that.
Yeah.
And I've been making this joke where I'm like, I'm not really an artist so much as like a prompt artist. It's like,
well, I don't say that. Like I
not
have
you,
too much respect for musicians,
But I do think that this is kind of the future where it's like I'm more of a prompt artist because it does take a certain amount of, you do have to learn how to talk to the machine and tell it to get it to do what you want it to do.
I mean, I'm still like, back in the day, someone had to write the lyrics. I did write the lyrics, so I get some credit, I guess.
No, I liked it. I loved the song, and it should. And for a minute before it never got credited, I was like, did someone? I was wondering who wrote that song, and then it never got credited. I'm like, oh, this must be one of those little AI songs that Eli made. And how and why did you get into that?
Well, I've always liked writing doggerel and like I'm a writer, so I like writing verse.
Mm-hmm.
So I've always done that. And when a friend would have been a year, maybe 14 months ago, told me about this. I use one program called Udio, but like there's a bunch of them, and said, you should play around with it and have some fun. And as like, I couldn't stop for like a month, and I just made all these songs. And at first, like, I wasn't trying to make serious music. I was kind of making, and then I realized it's almost serendipity because we didn't want to pay to license songs. So the way I originally did this podcast, when it was called The Re-Education, is I would find a song that existed to kind of make the point that I was trying to make for transitions. So to kind of give you an example of that, like, I don't know, like I did a deep dive into Menachem Begin, who's one of the founders of Israel, and focusing on when he was like underground as a rebel leader against the British, the British Empire. And there's a scene that I kind of get into to transition when, like, he has to assume an identity and live underground. And so I played like rebel music, the live version by Bob Marley and the Wailers, because I'm like 3 o'clock roadblock, which is like kind of like what he was going through. And I was like kind of bringing in the listener musically with like what was going to happen next in the story. And then because I was doing the AI stuff, and at a certain point we had our lawyers saying, well, you can't play Twisted Sister. We're not going to take it for your populist episode, even though that isn't our Andrew Jackson populism episode. We do break out some Twisted Sister. So then I was like, okay, well then I'll just make the AI songs myself. And I kind of love it. Like I hope people appreciate it. Like I think it works pretty good. So.
Yeah. So are you just at Free Press now?
Yeah. I mean, I'm still a contributing editor at Commentary Magazine.
Okay.
But I just write for Free Press mainly, and the podcast is through Free Press.
That's amazing. And how have you been liking it?
Oh, it's great.
Yeah.
I mean, it reminds me of I was an early employee at the Daily Beast with Tina Brown, and I think that Barry Weiss is like this generation's Tina Brown. Like, she has a great appreciation for what we call the high and the low. Like, so she runs, like she'll run a piece on, the poetry of W.H. Auden, and then she'll run like a piece on, like, I don't know, like the latest on ball waxing with like Nellie Bowles' great TGIF column.
Right.
So it's like the whole and I think it works, and we've been growing, and it's been good. It's a challenge covering the Trump administration, just because we don't go along with everything the president does. We've got plenty of criticism, but on the other hand, all of us who are like in the newsroom are super aware that there's just been such an over-the-top reaction to him from the time he entered American politics a decade ago, that we try not to kind of just give you like an emotional reaction in the moment. We want to try to, but we've also been, critical of the man. So that's good too.
That is good. What is your biggest defective character?
My biggest defective character? That's a good question. Well, I have ADHD. So sometimes that can be a great thing, but sometimes it can make it difficult for me to like kind of remember, I need like a calendar, to remember. I mean, it's just my brain works that way. So maybe that's one,
Did you, is it diagnosed ADHD or just self-diagnosed?
Yeah. Oh, okay. No, it's diagnosed. I have a prescription for Adderall.
Oh, gotcha.
And I don't abuse it, but I
would definitely be snorting Adderall if I got a prescription for it after like one day.
I'm aware, like, see, I don't know. For me, at least, the good news about Adderall is like it's not like I think, you had your struggles with alcohol, right? So like there's a moment like
everything.
Okay, fair. Yeah. Right. So like, okay, so with Adderall, it's like if I take more than 30 milligrams and I get like a horrible headache. So I take a small amount at a time, and it's like a little bit of a boost. It's like, I know it's like taking a pill. People say it's like, oh, it's a cocaine pill, but I try to keep it like in small doses. So But yeah, no, it's definitely it's an addictive thing, and I have an addictive personality. I think a lot of people with ADHD absolutely have addictive personalities.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm aware of that, and I think that like I've thought about this, like what makes an addictive personality different than a normal another personality, right? Well, it's that people who have addictive personalities often like there's a moment like if you're drinking too much, you're like, okay, I can't have anymore, and you
Yeah.
don't, you know what I'm saying? Like if you have an addictive personality, you're like you don't give a shit. Like
No.
like I know I'm too intoxicated, but I'm gonna have more because I really like this feeling,
Yeah.
and so I can relate to that on a lot of things, and
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think like I can relate to that. Like I know I'm not really hungry at 11:30 p.m., but I'm gonna nonetheless eat this bagel. Like I get that. Like
Yeah.
I know that feeling. You know, like I totally.
My cousin
Um,
and I always used to joke about that because I'd be like, I'll be the sober cab. And she's like, okay. And she was able to say, I'll be the sober cab, have 2 drinks, and then stop. And for me, it was like Pringles. Just once I started drinking, there was no turning me off until, yeah, I was not a
can I ask you?
reliable.
Can I ask you what's the worst drug you ever did?
Which worst drug?
Yeah.
Heroin. I mean,
Oh well, you try. Okay.
that
Is
was
it as
what
good
I,
as people say?
yeah, it's amazing. I highly
Yeah.
recommend
It's
it.
there's a great Mr. Show bit where it's just like you put a guy in like a lie detector machine and you're just like, have you ever smoked crack?
Mm,
He's like, yes. He goes, well, what was it like? He's like, it's fucking crack. It's great.
yeah.
It's like, yeah,
I've smoked crack. I definitely I don't think it's like I would be dead if I was still doing it now.
yeah.
It's different. It's not. I do jokes about this. I'm like, I feel like an old person talking to kids about cocaine without fentanyl, and I'm like, back in my day, kids, like you could do drugs for decades and hardly anyone would die. It's like now
What about weed? Can you not smoke weed?
I tried before I got sober, I tried to do just like cut out alcohol and only smoke weed, and it just didn't work. I inevitably would end up getting really stoned, and I was in LA and I'd be on Venice, and then I'd be, drinking before I knew it because it's so gorgeous, and
Yeah.
then I'd be doing rails off the back of a, toilet in a bar. Like it just didn't there's not much of an off switch. So I tried to do that, but then I still felt like there was like this fuzzy, I've said this on Rogan before, like there was a fuzzy distance kind of between me and everything. So when I got sober, it was pretty eye opening. And then as I got more into the culture wars, I was like, I don't want to even have any doubt that something that I tweeted, said
Right.
on a show, I need to be able to stand behind that and know that I was in my right mind when I said it on air, off air, when I wrote it and tweeted it. So that was another big part of it. And part of the reason I got sober was I was doing comedy, and I just knew that those 2 things couldn't exist in the same space at the same time. It's
Yeah.
too,
No, it's right. It's not a game. It's a craft and an art, and you
yeah,
have to work at it. Like it's like anything else. Like
yeah,
yeah. Full disclosure, I like marijuana, but
yeah. So marijuana was my true love.
yeah. But I also like have enough self-awareness to know that if when I'm writing and reporting and I'm doing my work, I can't be altered in any way.
Right, right.
Now, my mentor, Christopher Hitchens, the great Christopher Hitchens, was the one guy who, by the way, just started the day like he was an alcoholic. It's okay. He acknowledges this in his memoir, and it's true. He could write, like, I think he even wrote better, like A Few Sheets to the Wind. Like, it's a
Yeah.
crazy thing. He wasn't out of control, but like for some people, it's like I don't know what it is. Like it unlocks something, and they just flow. But most of us, you got to work at it. If you're in that kind of, if you're creating stuff.
I actually think that I might be like that, and that I when I would drink and I'd smoke weed, it would just flow, but I don't really know how good it was. And there's that old saying like, right drunk, get it sober, but I was never sober. And I don't know that when I got sober, I wasn't sure I would ever be able to write again. It was so connected to my process. Sure. And then I was telling this story in the green room the other night. I'm like, I got sober and I started doing comedy when I was drinking, and then I got sober and learned that I had stage fright, debilitating stage fright.
Oh wow.
That I didn't even know I had.
You've been on a journey. Like, but in a good way. It's like the hero's journey.
It's been nuts. So yeah, that was.
But you know, I just say, I predict that you will not go back to it because you will not relapse because you have a kid.
I mean,
right?
I think you have to. For me, I have to stay on top of it. I'm one of those people that it is a reflection of my spiritual condition, and I know when I'm dry. Like that. That's the other thing. And in early sobriety, I've been sober 11 years now. And in early sobriety, I got dry. And I think you just wear the people around you down when you're dry. And I was not happy and miserable. And this is why they say like that stinking thinking kind of comes before your first drink. So having a kid is, nothing. I've seen addicts lose everything. Their kids. I've seen addicts with 20 years of sobriety go out and literally lose everything. It's I don't know. That's why I think even in the culture wars right now, I don't have a great sense of authority, but it's because I don't fundamentally, as someone who is in recovery and comes from addiction, there's a part of me that doesn't fully trust myself. I'm always a little bit like, I don't know. So I don't know. That's it. I have to stay on top of it.
I think
I'm
it's
never
so
really
cool,
out
by
of the
way,
woods.
that you persevered. You're hilarious.
Thank you.
So you found it. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
you managed to kind of pull it together. It's a great testament, and it's one of the hardest things. And so,
thank you.
I
I
just
do
want to
sometimes
say,
think I was funnier when I was wasted, though. There's just no censor. What's your biggest asset?
my biggest asset.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's probably my curiosity. I love reading, and it goes back to the ADHD. It's like when I get a focus on something and I want to get to the bottom of something, or if I'm like, when I'm pulling towards, when there's a gravitational pull to like a project or something, like, or when I do these scripts, there's a lot of work that goes into each one of these podcasts, and this is my favorite thing. And it's like when I'm focused in and I know what this is going to be, I have the focus and the will and the energy to see it to completion. And so I sort of see it's like my greatest flaw is probably like that monofocus can, like, sometimes I can be really tough. Like, like sometimes I can be like, it's hard to like get through to me, and I let certain stuff go if I'm in the middle of it. And that's a liability. But then I think my best asset is that like I can see a project through and get it done and hopefully make it as great as possible. Although like I'm sure you have this too. You put it out in the world, and then if you listen to your set, you can think of like, those 3 things I could have done better.
Yeah.
So I'm like that too. Like I'm like, oh, maybe I could have done that one better, or maybe this would have been, maybe I could have said that better, or maybe I could have done this, or maybe we could have cut that part of it or something like that. But
I've been listening to so much Rick Rubin, his book.
He's great. He's a genius.
He is a genius. And that book, I listened to it driving in and out of Austin because we're in the suburbs to go do comedy. And it's been just grounding me in the process of being a creative. Because I think when I remember I had a really brilliant friend, Carter, and he was a professional illustrator. He did New Yorker covers. He was working at Disney, and he was one of my kind of earliest mentors as an artist or whatever at 19, 20 when I moved to LA. And I was just writing. I had nothing. And he said, enjoy these days, Bridget, because someday you'll turn your muse into a mule. And I had no idea what he meant. And I think about that and it's truly just going pro. But
yeah,
it is that like, wow, if you had told me that now it's like, I feel so grateful to have deadlines. I feel so grateful to have shows that I have to do because I've got advertisers and I can't, I'm my own boss, but I still answer to other people and my audience. And I just think of that a lot. Those were the glory days when I was just being creative purely because it was coming out of me and I had no real choice. And I feel like listening to Rick Rubin lately has gotten me back into that beginner's mind, and also taking a break from comedy and starting it again has forced that a bit of back into just beginner's mind, where I get to, he's like, there's no playing to win, there's only playing to play, is one thing that he says that I love. And I think you just forget that once you become a professional.
Can I ask you, what when you first got your first real paycheck?
Yeah.
What did you spend it on?
Oh, probably bills. I mean, I was so broke. I was
All right, but I mean, once you started making money and you were out of
the first thing I treated myself, and I'm still, it's not like I'm a millionaire here. The first thing that I did by myself, though, when I had enough money and I was freelance for a long time.
Yeah.
I got myself a nice bed. Like, I'd been sleeping on a futon. I'd been sleeping on a blow-up mattress for so long, and I got sober late, and I'm a late bloomer in many respects. So I was probably 35, 36, 37 when I finally was like, I can afford a nice mattress, like a grown-up with a frame, not just like a mattress on a bed. What about you?
Okay, so like my first, like, because I was a staff writer, so it's a little bit of a different thing. But like when I first got like I got a great salary when I was hired by Bloomberg to be a syndicated columnist, and it was just like I was making good money, but then they like doubled it. Like,
right,
it was a lot of money, at the time, and it was before I had a family, so it was like amazing that I couldn't believe how much money I was making. So when I got my first paychecks, I was like, wow, this is good money. What I did was I got like a bespoke suit. Like I was gonna be like this. I'm gonna wear this on TV and like when I meet with like foreign ministers or something like that. Like, but it was like I'm like, you and I are both. I'm not a gazillionaire either, and especially like now when you have a kid, there's all these expenses. Like, it's a crazy thing. Like, I'm making good money, but it's like you sort of don't realize sometimes they're like, oh, like, I got to pay for this, or like these tests, and like, oh, it's yes, we send her to preschool, but then there's aftercare, and then there's all kinds. We have a nanny. It's like these kinds of things. But like, it's obviously worth it. But like, I just love those kind of stories, like when you first kind of make it, and and I love that story about the bed. That's great.
Then I bought myself a piano that was like really.
Would you play?
I do, but not great, and I was getting back into it. But this was more of a present to myself for, I think it was like 3 years of sobriety, 2 or 3. I was still new, and I started making money and enough to get myself a piano, and I had a savings for the first time, and I ended up I loved it. It was, I thought my roommate was like, I got you a good deal because I'm Persian and they're Persian. And then I had a Russian come tune it and he was like, how much did you pay for this? And I was like, why? And he was like, because it's worth $300. And I was like, oh, I paid $3,000 for it. I want to kill myself.
Oh, that's funny.
But that's what my friend who's a musician goes, Bridget, all musicians overpay for an instrument that they love. That just means that you're a musician.
Oh, that's great.
I was like, that's a nice way for me to frame something that makes me cringe.
Yeah. Who do you love music? Like, what music do you love to listen to?
I'm so all over the place because I love music and I devour it addictively.
Me too.
Right now, I've been really into. I'll just tell you who I'm into right at this moment, and it's. I've been obsessively listening to every single thing that he's written, and it's The Bones of J.R. Jones.
Oh, I didn't even know it. What kind of music is it?
I'll get your number and I'll text you the song I'm obsessed with when we get off. But he's been great. I'm obsessed with Lord Huron. I love them. I don't know if you're familiar. Their album, I don't know. Summer really brings out like a different vibe for me.
I associate with certain songs all the time. I know exactly what you mean. And not just obvious songs about summer, but like there's certain things about like like that Rolling Stones song "Waiting on a Friend" is just a
Yeah.
summer song for me.
Yeah.
I love that song, and it's a summer song.
Who are you currently obsessed with musically?
Okay, the first Pretenders album,
Oh.
Pretenders,
Uh-huh.
is just like wall-to-wall bangers,
Yeah.
and it's not I mean, I have a lot of respect for Chrissy Hynde, I think she's great. That record, though, is just it's almost a punk record, and it's really, really good,
It's
and,
so
like,
good.
love that. So I love that, I kind of obsessed with that recently. I mean, I'm wearing my Clash shirt. The first Clash album is, like, obviously never is never bad, it's always great.
Who is the punk band that you put in your podcast? MC5? Was that who it was?
Yes, MC5.
Oh, gosh. I was like, I haven't listened to them in so long. It made me want to just go back down that road.
Well, I went through like MC5 is great, but for me, it's like the slight evolution for me. MC5 is the Stooges, and like those first Stooges records are unbelievable.
Yeah.
When I was this is when we were trying to still use licensed music, but when I first came up with our episode on Ulrika Meinhof and the Bader Meinhof gang, I thought to myself as I was like researching it and writing it, I was like, the soundtrack to this is like early Stooges. Like it's that dissonant music that makes it feel like the world's coming to an end, and like that's kind of where they were coming from. So like that. But I mentioned like all these like I listen to all kinds of stuff. Like I like hip hop, I like jazz, I like it all. And I'm gonna do more like music related ones. In fact, we've got one in the works, probably be out later this summer on punk, and specifically the idea behind punk, and like how if you accept that punk, like what is punk rock as we understand it, like beyond just the music, right? Like of like a certain style, it's like creative destruction, the idea that you have to destroy in order to build something new, which is probably a good thing. Death wish, a bad thing, and corruption of the youth. So if those are your three main pillars of punk, who was the first punk? Socrates. Anyway.
Right. I love that. You kind of referenced that a little bit. You alluded to that actually on your comedy podcast, the Lenny Bruce one, and I was thinking that it would make a great podcast.
As Lenny Bruce is punk. Like Lenny Bruce is punk. Dylan Going Electric is punk. Like there's all these things that are not technically punk rock, but like are kind of in the spirit of that punk. And
well, even now they're saying kind of MAGA is punk. You know, that was the vibe shift.
Well, it is and it isn't. I think culturally it's punk. But there are elements, it's like if MAGA means like kicking people out of the country because they wrote an op-ed you didn't like, that's like anti-punk, you know? Like so even if I disagreed with the op-ed, like, you know, I don't like the op-ed, but like that doesn't matter. Like you can't be like stomping on people. You know, like punk is like, you know, punk would not or like I don't know, like
Agenda 2025 isn't very punk when you like.
No, that's anti-punk. So
Well, thank you. Where can we find you and your podcast?
It's Breaking History. You can get it on all the major streaming platforms or at the Free Press. I'm at the Free Press. I'm on Twitter at Eli Lake. That's the one social media I still use.
I'm going back to Facebook. I decided.
I love it. That's punk rock. Like Facebook is now punk.
It's so true. Eli,
hey, you were the best. I'm so glad I get to finally meet you this way. I've followed you for years.
Well, we met in New York for Dissident.
That's right. We met
briefly
at the Dissident thing briefly.
And then you and I were on the same Mark Halperin show when they had me on right the night before the election. And I was saying something and everyone, and there was some Democrat, you're the only person who was kind of nodding along. And there was some Democratic strategist who was like, well, if you're actually right about what you're saying, everybody should replay this when they regroup for the Democrats. And turns out I was right.
I think you and I both understood by that point. Like I was like, Trump's going to totally win.
Yeah.
Like, you can just sort of tell. I sort of felt like Trump was going to win like a year ago. Like I remember like the summer, I was like, even before he was shot, I was like, they're not going to get away with it. Even before the debate. Like, remember that like everybody knew Joe Biden wasn't there.
No.
We knew. We all saw it.
Can you believe though that was only a year ago?
No. It feels like a lifetime ago. I
It
agree with you,
feels
yes.
like 10 years ago. It's so
Right.
weird. Well, we'll have to. You're welcome back anytime. I hopefully will be in
thank
New
you.
York this summer at some point. I'm so glad we got to chat.
Let
and
me know
thank
when
you.
you're in New York, because I definitely want to kind of catch you
I will.
live. Do you go to the Cellar?
I mean, I know Noam. I love him, but I don't know. I haven't been there. So, well, I mean, I haven't performed there.
Well, I'll go wherever you perform.
I'll find a place.
I want to go to Austin anyway, so maybe I'll do like an
Yeah.
episode on Austin.
That'd be fun.
That'd be fun. Okay.
All right, thank you.
This has been Walk-Ins Welcome with Bridget Phetasy. I'm Bridget Phetasy, and you're welcome. It's the dumbest line.